Hello. Good afternoon.
Okay, I guess we can start. Welcome everybody to this virtual roundtable addressing aggravated challenges for human rights defenders in times of pandemic. We're expected to be almost 600 participants from over 100 countries on platform today, which is already quite a technology challenge. I'm very happy to meet you all. My name is Hugo Gabero. I'm the Human Rights Defenders Protection Desk Director at FIDH, the International Federation for Human Rights, and also currently co-chairing the board of ProtectDefenders.eu Consortium, the European Union Human Rights Defenders mechanism implemented by international civil society. Protect Defenders brings together 12 human rights defenders protection NGOs from around the world, which complement each other in order to provide rapid and comprehensive support to human rights defenders at risk on all continents, such as emergency assistance, capacity building, trial monitoring, field visits, trainings, and outreach, just to name a few. As we have seen over the past year, a large number of states and non-state actors have used the pandemic as a pretext to either neglect or even further repress human rights defenders, which has materialized in an increase, notably in terms of digital risks in a world where the internet has become even more omnipresent, but also increased violence against women human rights defenders and shrinking spaces for advocacy and public mobilization. The three issues, digital risks, increased violence against women human rights defenders, and shrinking spaces, have been discussed over the past week during restricted online sessions gathering defenders from around the world. And we have the chance today to have three rapporteurs, one for each group, who will be reporting on the recommendations stemming from these consultations and discuss it with key European Union and United Nations stakeholders, whom we also have the pleasure to welcome to this roundtable. I will now hand over the floor to Hasan Shire, the Executive Director of Defend Defenders, a Protect Defenders member organization, who will present the panelists and moderate this roundtable. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and Hasan, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, German. Thank you, Hugo. Ladies and gentlemen, and in between, I want to welcome you to this roundtable. It's with such a great pleasure to be here today moderating a session aimed at discussing the increasing challenge that human rights defenders find themselves in today's under the themes addressing aggravated challenge for human rights defenders in times of pandemic, with a specific focus on digital risk, as Hugo said, increased violence against the women defenders, and shrinking spaces, advocacy, and mobilization. The session today is culmination of consultative processes that was held over the last few days with different groups of human rights defenders discussing the focus area that I had mentioned earlier. Today, we shall listen to testimonies, powerful testimonies of human rights defenders confronting these challenges, and especially discuss new answers from the international civil society and the international public actors. In specific recommendations to the EU stakeholders and the protection mechanism, we are joined today by Eamon Gilmore, EU Special Representative for Human Rights, and Mary Lawlor, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. Our panelists, distinguished panelists, rapporteurs of digital risk, and Erika Ivan, she will present the outcome of the consultation. Again, we have another distinguished panelist, high-risk judge. Erika, she's a high-risk judge and member of Guatemalan Association for Judges of Integrity, Guatemala. We will have also another rapporteur, Janeta Akhligova, She will be rapporteuring on increased violence against women, human rights defenders, and will present the outcome of that consultation. She works for Equality Now, Peace Building UK, Russian Justice Initiative, in the program focus on civil society development in both Soviet countries. She runs a program of HRD security in the North Caucasus, Russia, where women's rights defenders face particularly high risk. Also, third rapporteur, Didar Erdam, rapporteur on shrinking spaces for advocacy and public mobilization, and will present the outcome of that consultation. Practicing lawyer and registered at the Istanbul Bar Association, she is also the chairperson of TOHAF, Foundation for Society and Legal Studies, Turkey. The session will start now with remarks from Eamon Gilmore, the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, and then the Mary Lawlor will be following, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. There will be a follow-up interventions from the panelists. Thereafter, we shall then open up to the audience with question and answer session. Then we will wrap up, and Hugo again will make closing remarks. So if you have questions, you can always post, you can type, and the Secretariat members will be collecting those questions, and then appropriately we will address to the mechanisms concerned. Welcome again. Let me now give the floor the EU Special Representative for Human Rights Defenders, Mr. Eamon Gilmore. Welcome, Mr. Eamon. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Hassan, and thank you, Hugo, and to all at Protect Defenders for the invitation to join the 600 participants today from over 100 countries. It's a particular pleasure to participate with my good friend Mary Lawlor, the UN Special Rapporteur, and I'm looking forward to hearing the reports of the rapporteurs and to our discussion later today. My role as the EU Special Representative for Human Rights is to contribute to the effectiveness and presence of the EU's external work on human rights, to work with all of our institutions, including the European Parliament and the Member States, and to add value to the human rights efforts of the Union. The protection of human rights defenders and our support for their work is a central part of the EU's external action. Every day in different parts of the world, the EU and its member states are working for human rights and democracy in concrete ways. On the ground, our EU delegations and member states' embassies are supporting human rights defenders, sometimes taking them out of danger, observing trials, and working on projects to support human rights defenders. We're particularly proud of the support that of the EU human rights defenders mechanism, ProtectDefenders.eu, through which practical support has been provided to 45,000 human rights defenders at risk and their families since 2015. Even before the pandemic, we were witnessing a gradual and persistent backsliding in democracy and human rights. Women's rights are continually questioned, and we see many governments censoring journalists, manipulating information, closing civil and political space, and attacking human rights defenders. These trends have been accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic. This makes the work of defenders as independent watchdogs in this difficult period even more important, given the need for independent monitoring and reporting on the crisis and its impact on human rights and democracy. Every day, we see the courage of human rights defenders in action to safeguard human rights and democracy, whether it is in Belarus or even in the past week in Myanmar. Unfortunately, the situation for defenders across the world remains extremely difficult, with an increase in killings, with specific groups being increasingly targeted, including women human rights defenders, LGBTI defenders, environmental, land, and indigenous defenders. We have seen some particular risks increasing due to the pandemic, such as the prolongation of incommunicado detentions, a slowdown in judicial processes, a downscaling of state protection measures, or a higher degree of digital surveillance, cyber harassment, or reprisals. Many defenders who were already at risk have seen their situation worsen. Defenders who need to relocate abroad, away from danger in their country, are not now able to do so, considering the existing restrictions on freedom of movement and travel. Human rights defenders who are detained because of their human rights engagement and opinions, some of them for lengthy periods already, and affected by serious health issues, are also at high risk. Their situation is worsened by the fact that they are often not able to see their families, lawyers, and doctors due to containment measures. This is further exacerbated by the fact that the justice system is not functioning normally, so human rights defenders in pre-trial detention and awaiting their trial see their delays prolonged. One of my main activities during the pandemic has been to advocate for the humanitarian release of human rights defenders or political prisoners with governments around the world due to the increased risks of the virus. Wherever crackdowns on human rights defenders happen in the world, the EU is committed to act. We have recently adopted an action plan on human rights and democracy for the period 2020 to 2024, unanimously agreed by our 27 member states, and for which I will have a central role in guiding its implementation. Strengthening the protection of human rights defenders is mainstreamed throughout that action plan, and I look forward to working with you, with all of your colleagues, in the implementation of that plan and working closely with you in protecting human rights defenders and working to defend them. I'm looking forward very much to our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilmore. That's a very powerful presentation. We have taken note of your activities. Without further ado, let me welcome Mary Lawlor to have the floor, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. Mary, is she around? What's that? Yeah. Where's Mary? I allowed her, but I cannot see. Mary? Just click here. Mary, you have the floor. Yeah, I knew.
Here, I think I've got it now.
Okay, good.
I'm really sorry. What happened was the buttons wouldn't work. It wouldn't allow me to stream or to put on the video. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'll just talk. Doesn't matter if you can't see me. So thanks very much for having me here. And I'm sorry about this technical hitch that suddenly appeared. I'll start by briefly explaining what my mandate does. The UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders works to protect human rights defenders at risk and to promote their work in accordance with the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders adopted in 1998. And I receive information from civil society about human rights violations against human rights defenders and use this information to raise my concerns with governments informal letters called communications, which become public 60 days after being sent. I engage with states formally and informally about the situation of human rights defenders in their countries through meetings, webinars, and other events. And in normal times, I make 2 official visits to states annually to assess the situation for human rights defenders there. And I write a report afterwards, which includes recommendations to government on how better to support and protect them. But of course, I haven't been able to travel because of COVID. As well as that, I do 2 thematic reports, one for the UN Human Rights Council and one for the General Assembly. And my next one is on killings of human rights defenders, which I'll present in a couple of weeks to the Human Rights Council, and it's on the OHCHR website now. Just to say a couple of words about the different areas that we're going to be listening to today. On digital risks, we know that everyone's work has been pushed online over the last year. And for defenders, that means a reliance on digital communication. And the apps and platforms they use are vulnerable to attack. And we've seen an increase in online threats, including death threats on Facebook and Twitter. And my report, as I said, on the killings of defenders will also address the threats that often precede them. Regarding women human rights defenders and COVID, we've seen over the last year, too, the damage done to human rights defenders and their work. A report from FEDH out this week showed that 92 defenders were killed by the virus in Brazil between March and August 2020. And we know that the most vulnerable have been hit the hardest. I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of defenders since I took up the mandate last May, and I've heard from women human rights defenders who have been confined at home looking after children or other relatives, and if at risk either from within the family or from the community, can't escape to safety because of COVID travel restrictions. I've seen also, too, how COVID has meant that defenders have had to redefine their work, sometimes from a focus on advocacy to one of distributing food and medicine to local communities, and how many have been targeted for exposing the incompetence or corruption of authorities in dealing with COVID. This has helped to reshape some public opinion towards defenders who see their work at closer hand than before. We have some opportunity here to mobilize public support for defenders when we remind people who defenders are, that they are the people taking on COVID in hospitals and clinics, those supplying provisions to communities, and journalists telling the truth about the virus and how governments are handling it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your precise intervention. Let me now invite Erica Ivan, who is a rapporteur of digital risk and will present the outcome of that consultation. Erica, you have the floor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and in between. Thank you for the invitation and for allowing me to participate in this roundtable that offers good results and enriching results today. On the table in which we are working, we adopted and we approached the challenges that represents for the human rights defenders, the digital risks that taking care of this emergency of COVID-19 that we have had to live have become these digital surroundings in more than a working tool. They become, for the defenders of human rights, the mobilization and the spaces of mobilization in our working places, and they are part of our own identities. And with this increase in the use of the digital surrounding, we also increase the risks and the menaces for the relators of human rights and defenders. We approach every topic related with this use of digital space on the part of the human rights defenders that have allowed certain advances in spite of the fact of all the difficulties that we have, because they allow us through those social media and those informatic tools to keep on communicating and exchanging information, and it has also facilitated certain processes in the recollection of evidence and the identification of people, massacres, products, common digital archives that allow us to preserve this information. And here I remember in Guatemala all the process that they have done about the historical archive, and that has allowed us to take care of this information. But before all this, we were discussing about the need of knowing these tools in order to have a safe and responsible use of the digital space. We also discussed certain aspects related with the need of a greater financing for the cybersecurity. And also within all this, we talked about the abuse that the states and the governments may do in prejudice of the human rights defenders. Why? Because through this digital media, we have seen and we have detected that we can have surveillance tasks, bullying or cyberbullying of defenders of human rights, and also people that work for equality of the LGBT people. And they have also discussed in this referential framework which is the role of the great technological companies and the platforms in social media, and some recommendations in general terms. And we also reached the conclusion of certain recommendations in order to do this in the international community, and the discussion about protection mechanisms for the human rights defenders.
Well, thank you, Erika. And now she seems she have concluded her remarks, right? Now let me invite now Janet Akhligova, who will be presenting the report from the workshop of increased violence against women human rights defenders. And as we know that that's a huge challenge, women human rights defenders. So let me welcome Janet.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Do you hear me well?
Good afternoon. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. And special thanks for arranging this roundtable, because these issues are of extreme importance now. I mean, they have always been, but today they are of more importance. So on Wednesday, we had quite a meaningful discussion on the violence against women human rights defenders. Thanks to ProtectDefenders.eu, who organized this discussion. And so we talked about the challenges and violence that women human rights defenders face today. So because the whole world situation today, when the politics are a lot with nationalism and populism, and we see the general gender backlash in the world. So, and of course, it affects also the women human rights defenders, especially because this COVID crisis, which also entails additional challenges faced by the women rights defenders. So the main outcomes of our discussion about the violence that women human rights defenders face were of like specific concerns about targeted violence against women human rights defenders by far-right groups, like in Ukraine, by religious extremists, like in Afghanistan, Syria, in Russian Northern Caucasus. They are more active now, and the situation of women human rights defenders who operate in conflict areas, who face specific challenge. The issue of enforced disappearances of women human rights defenders, because we see all over the world that people are just being abducted and no investigations and no pressure, and the governments just are not accountable for these things happening. Another issue is sexual and gender-based violence faced by women and women human rights defenders, because this is not the same as you are working in this field and you are a man, because the world itself is not quite a safe place for a woman to be, just for any woman. And if you are a human rights defender, that means that doesn't mean that you are free from gender-based violence, and that's an additional risk. So sexual and gender-based violence, as I said, so multitude of traumas faced by women human rights defenders, they impact on their mental health and also on their human rights activism. Just a couple of hours ago, I read a big post on Facebook by a Russian human rights defender, a woman who works with teenage girls, and she said that they are closing down most actually of their activities, and the reason is because people are leaving, people are burnt out, and people are just cannot work anymore because they do not get any support to their mental health. Psychological therapy is very expensive. Of course, people just leave, they cannot work. Another issue is intersectionality of the risks, like when multiple vulnerability layers intersect with one person who is doing human rights work, that of course makes it more dangerous, more challenging. Like like in Russia, if you are a Russian ethnic Russian woman living, being raised in Moscow, having good education, being married to a man and having children is not absolutely the same as if you are a woman human rights defender from Chechnya, who has been through a war, and you are representing a queer or LGBT community. It's totally different thing, which we think is this issue is significantly neglected in the discourse about human rights defenders' security. Lack of accountability for the perpetrators of attacks. This is a huge problem all over the world, which we see. Gap in legal frameworks to protect women human rights defenders from attacks, but also general lack of protection from the authorities with the existing laws. We have a case when the woman rights defender from a woman rights defender from the Northern Caucasus, she got the call when she was threatened. The guy said that he's going to kill her because she's a feminist and because she is doing her women's rights work. And when she went to police to file, police did nothing, just nothing. And she had to leave the country. So this is a huge problem all over the world. Constant threats, not only from governments, but also from their own communities and families. This is what women face, especially if they have to operate in a tradition, and they live and they come from traditional communities. And this becomes another additional challenge for them. And they always have to work in a way so that they have to self-censor. They also have to stop certain activities sometimes because they have their own communities and families pressure. And of course, cyber threats, digital surveillance, online stigmatization and slander, because against women human rights defenders, this online stigmatization is used and we know that women human rights defenders face very specific challenges with this, because and again, if we go to the communities like Afghanistan or Northern Caucasus or Syria, these stigmatizing like articles and texts and things that they are writing about a woman, they can be really, really dangerous for her, and she can become a subject.
Janet, sorry, you have passed your 5 minutes, but now you can get 1 minute to make recommendations to the important panel in front of you.
Oh. Okay, sorry, I was not told about 5 minutes. I'm sorry. Yeah. That's fine. Okay, I would go to the recommendations. We talked about funding which needs to be available to create and defender platforms at regional level to develop advocacy, community engagement, education and capacity building, and especially network. We talked about making more funding for technical support and digital capacity building, for research to counter the specific social and cultural change and challenges that are faced by the human rights defenders. We need an increased attention at international level and commitment and allies and political will to deal with this issue. Also adapting international protection instruments to women human rights defenders because they are more focused on men's norms. And we would like to reinforce the allocation of practical support, including access to urgent protection and urgent relocation. We would like to develop recovery and rehabilitation programs for women rights defenders who are experiencing mental health issues due to their work, and especially those from marginalized communities, and even those women who cannot go on working anymore with their human rights. And we would also like to promote digital educational platforms for women and girls and increase their access to education. In some contexts, it can lead to diminution of particular violence facing women, such as forced marriage, for example. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. I wish we should have told you before, but it was a very excellent presentation. Particularly what you have focused more was so important of intersectionality of being women, of being disadvantaged places, working in a situation of armed conflict, and then become a feminist, LGBTI activist, and all that happens to one person, how vulnerable that person can be. So we have taken note on that, and I hope the honorables will be having some thoughts on that as well. Now, without further ado, let me welcome Dieter Erdem, who will present shrinking spaces. This word I have heard many times, which let me do this. Okay. So I've heard many times shrinking spaces, collapsing spaces, and all that. But now it's with regard to the advocacy and public mobilization. So I would like to invite the special rapporteur on, the rapporteur on that particular breakaway panel, Dieter Erdem.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Thanks again for having me, and we know that this platform is needed for all the participants because during the pandemic there were not any ways to bring and speak out some issues with international mechanisms. So we will try to share all the challenges and the recommendations from the participants that we discussed yesterday. So pandemic and restrictions had important impacts on human rights and on violations, especially for the activists in the rural areas. Had physical difficulty to follow up and continue do their working. During this process, especially use of technology, knowledge of technology was a big issue. We face that lack of knowledge of technology and also a lack of the equipment, technological equipment were preventing working effectively in this field. So some challenges were coming, but some were specific for different countries. In the local level, this technological knowledge issue was very negative conclusions on the work. And for example, technological knowledge, poor connectivity in some countries, difficulty of access to these tools, and all these things require trainings and subtractions. So each country could not have the same possibilities in their countries. These lockdowns, the restrictions had big impacts on the rights. For example, meetings, gatherings, and demonstrations were banned. So there was a balance. One side, the public health, and on the other hand, fundamental rights were aside. So there should have been a balance, but many countries did not manage to do this. And in practice, pandemic was abused. It became a kind of justification for the state to use to do some limitations, but it was used very arbitrarily. That's what we saw in practice. So this situation caused difficulties to access the national and international mechanisms. It also was politicizing the violations as well. This was another wrong usage of the pandemic, like justification. There were also discussed the innovative ways during this discussions, and for example, staying in contact with actors and population is innovative to make the conditions better. And as the therapies, but not only. I'm sorry, can you hear me? My connection was cut. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Sorry, I don't know if this was because of connection, but I will just jump and continue. Even there are limitations, physical limitations, the virtual methods can be used for connection. And also educations on technology for marginalized groups can be produced. This virtual advocacy also, this is not this is not the most useful way for the human rights defense, but this is also a tool to make the violations visible. For example, doing things on social media. These are kind of they can be innovative ways to get discussed. Also, creating platforms to communicate secure with the EU can be a method. I want to now share the recommendations of our group with you. First, the most important thing is political support from the authorized institutions, because we expect and we need a stronger statements from you. Sometimes we see that and we can witness that the statements for the statements are not effective enough. They need to be vigorous and stronger to speak out the issues. Also supporting facilities of the NGOs for the groups working for the vulnerable populations. Supporting their facilities is important and a need. This was one of the recommendations. Promoting NGOs financial presence must be sustainable. So supporting and promoting NGOs finding presence by financial support is another need and recommendation that we discussed.
Thank you. Thank you for the excellent presentation and the recommendations you have made from your group. Now we will be moving, if you allow us, to a question and answer session, whereby you might be also getting some time to react those questionnaires from the floor, and we will be also inviting you again to have your maybe 1 or 2 minutes to make your concluding remarks. So now I want to open the floor, and I was also inviting you to write down in the chat room if you have questions to Mary Lawlor and Eamon Gilmore and the other panelists on the panel. So Secretariat, I think you might be, shall we open? I only see 10 people here, but can we open now the floor? Where is Secretariat? Yeah. Secretariat not steaming. What's now the other modalities? From the end, yeah. Unfortunately, we cannot see the people in the other room who will be raising the questions. We need to be linked up so that we see who's speaking. I cannot reach out to the Secretariat. Yeah. Time have been reached. Yeah, the previous ones. Huh? I disable Mary. Huh? Where's the active ones then now? Huh? They are not there. Yeah, allow streaming, yeah. Yes, do we have active participants here? They're in different room, huh? Yes, yeah.
Hello, Hassan, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
I think that before opening the floor for the questions that we will collect from the chat, I think that we can dedicate still some time for the rapporteurs, Erika, Janet, and Didar to discuss with Mr. Gilmore and Ms. Lawlor about the conclusions. And maybe after perhaps 40 minutes or 30 minutes of discussion, then we will collect the questions from the chat and just hand it over to you, if that's okay.
To me. Okay. So now what shall I do?
You can enable the streams of Janet, Didar, Erika, Ms. Gilmore, Ms. Lawlor, and Mr. Gilmore, and perhaps they can exchange about the conclusions of the meetings.
Okay.
Thank
So
you,
the panelists and the two special guests, right?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So now we have we will be all coming together, the three panelists, and Janet is also here, and okay, Erica. Okay, now we will be coming together. Erica, yeah. Okay, Erica, you have the floor. There will be now a session of exchange with Mary Lawlor and Mr. Gilmore, with the three representatives of the breakaway workshops. We'll have those discussions for some time, so that now you have ample time to put your questions to Mr. Gilmore and Ms. Mary Lawlor. And afterwards, then the questions will be collected from the floor by the Secretariat, presented to me, and then I'll be specifically addressing that 5 of you one by one. So now let me give the floor. Erica, Ivan. Erica, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Hassan. And I just wanted to ask them from the European Union, you spoke about the fact that there is a work that has been done for many years in order to strengthen the work of the human rights defenders in this digital arena. Therefore, I would like you to talk to us about which are the main axes that are set forth in the work in order to avoid the risks and the digital risks and threats against defenders of human rights, please.
Okay, please disable. Okay, yeah. Mr. Gilmore, and I think let me disable you, Janet, then. One by one, I have to enable them. Yeah, where's Mr. Gilmore? Yeah. Yes, you have the floor, Mr. Gilmore.
Yeah, thank you very much. You can hear me.
Yeah.
First of all, let me thank all three rapporteurs for their presentations, and to say that even though we had some technical difficulties with some of the presentations, I have actually received a written summary of the discussions that you've had, and I've received the recommendations that you have made, so you can be assured that they have been well received and will be considered. On the issue of digital, of the digital area, this is something that we are giving priority to in relation to the European Union's digital agenda in any event. And within the action plan on human rights and democracy, which I spoke about already, one of the main pillars of that action plan over the next number of years will be new technologies. And that will include how new technologies can be harnessed to assist in human rights work, and in particular to assist human rights defenders. I think it's been clear from the discussion that we've had to date that while the potential exists in new technologies and in digital technologies to help the work of human rights defenders, that potential can only be realized if human rights defenders have access to the technology, have access to the equipment that is needed, are able to connect, and in many parts of the world, and particularly many areas where human rights defenders are working, connectivity is poor and is also subject to internet shutdowns and to various interferences by state services. There is also, as has been mentioned, the issue of training and the ability to use the equipment. In relation to the specific risks that human rights defenders face from new technologies, first of all, on the area of cyberbullying and the use of new technologies to harass human rights defenders, and we've seen a lot of that, a lot of online threatening of human rights defenders. We have talked with the main service providers, with the main tech companies, about the establishment of a code of conduct online. We are also bringing forward a Digital Services Act. We have already brought forward the GDPR in relation to data protection, and we are working on increasing the capacities and capabilities in relation to cyberbullying. But we also want to work to develop the potential of new technologies to help human rights defenders in their work. There is then also, of course, the issue of surveillance and the way in which new technologies are being used as a surveillance tool by many regimes. I think one of the consequences of the pandemic has been the increased use of new technologies, both in a positive way, as we are doing, for example, today, but also in a negative way in the form of surveillance. So these are all areas that we are working on, and will very much value the recommendations that you make and the suggestions that you make for how that can be worked out in practical terms.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you have humbly given them your thoughts on that. Now let me invite Janet, who had very animating conversations with regard to the violence against women human rights defenders. Janet, now you can ask your questions, direct your questions to the UN Special Rapporteur or the EU Special Representative for Human Rights. You have the floor, Janet.
Thank you. So my question would be about, is there any, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like, okay. Is there any effort from you to make the women human rights defenders' safety, like to bring it to political agenda, to make it more global? Any initiative for like research platform building, so that to make it global and to bring it to political agenda?
Mary or Eamon Gilmore? Yeah, you can react.
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. Yes, I wasn't clear whether that was directed at me or at Mary. Well, let me just give two very practical initiatives that the European Union has taken in recent times, and they are in the form of guidances that we have issued to our delegations throughout the world, both in respect of women human rights defenders. The first is to encourage our delegations to reach out proactively to women human rights defenders and to civil society organizations which represent and speak for women human rights defenders. And that is because very often the civil society organizations that our delegations deal with on the ground, to work very well with us and provide with very important information. Sometimes it is the case that women human rights defenders are underrepresented in these organizations, and their priorities and particular needs don't always come through. So we have now encouraged our delegations to make a special effort to reach out particularly to women human rights defenders, because we recognize the particular vulnerabilities and particularly the violence that is targeted against women human rights defenders. Secondly, we have encouraged our delegations that in their bilateral engagement with countries to give priority to the needs of women human rights defenders. Thirdly, in the context of the pandemic, because one thing that we do know from the pandemic is that women have disproportionately suffered from the pandemic, either because of their representation in the health services, or because of violence and targeting that we have seen in many different respects, including the targeting and violence against women human rights defenders. We're giving particular attention to that area as well.
Thank you. Mary, you want to say?
Yes, I would also like to comment a little on the previous issue of digital security, if I may. I mean, I think it is really, really important that human rights defenders are given access to secure digital tools. And I note that obviously internet, we've seen how it can let us down. But I note that one of the recommendations in one of the, because there were a lot of overlap between the three issues, was the provision of smartphones at the very least to human rights defenders who have internet problems as a way of trying to ensure a little bit of access. My own, I suppose, coming from the last 8 months of being rapporteur, I've talked to hundreds of defenders all over the place, and yes, there are many challenges to do with digital security, and they have been well documented in the paper with the main point of the recommendation. And I note that funding goes right across all three. But it is really important that when there isn't the opportunity to move safely and to travel, that defenders can be connected by internet in their own language if necessary, and for when they are connecting with people like me, that there is secure platforms with simultaneous interpretation. I'm finding that a real difficulty. Because if you go from meeting to meeting, you really need simultaneous interpretation rather than translation, which makes the meeting twice as long, and you're trying to get around to more and more defenders. It isn't efficient. So that is one thing that I think is really important. And the other thing on the plus side, I mean, I've managed to connect with defenders in very remote areas who have never connected before, either internationally or regionally through the internet. And I remember one defender in the Amazon telling me that because of COVID, he had learned a new way of gathering. This is how he put it, a new way of gathering by internet. And it was allowing him to access information, but also training online, and to become aware of where the networks were and where the support could be. So I think we need to look at it a bit like that as well. On the other hand, a defender in Africa traveled 3 hours for a meeting with me to get a secure connection and just a connection. So it just shows you and the minuses have all been very much outlined here. Now, when it comes to women, I mean, obviously the UN, and if there is a gender priority for the UN, and in the purpose of the rapporteur mandate, the last point it says is integrate a gender perspective and pay particular attention to women human rights defenders. Now, I have been doing that. I've actually spoken to more women human rights defenders and LGBTI defenders than I have to men. I've nothing against men, but at the same time, I'm trying to reach voices of women who are struggling and working as women human rights defenders. And I think, when you look at the threats that women get, both from within the community and sometimes from their own family and outside of the community, and then from, in patriarchal societies, in societies where there's religious fundamentalism. I had 2 meetings with women human rights defenders in Afghanistan. We're going to do a side event on women human rights defenders in Afghanistan on the 5th of March. If anyone is interested, the Norwegian Human Rights Fund are organising it for us, and we'll have women defenders from Afghanistan, because and myself and the Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression will be at it, because the women are defenders are being butchered in Afghanistan. Journalists and human rights defenders are being specifically and deliberately targeted at the moment, and there has been a huge increase in killings. So I'm very aware, and I have been for many years, of the specific gendered threats that women face because of who they are and what they do. And I promise you, it will be a large part of the work that I do while I have the mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. In this session, only 5 minutes left, because now we are collecting all the questions from the 600 participants and summarizing into clusters, and then I'll be presenting to you guys. Invite Didar Erdem to raise a question to both Mary and Gilmore. Didar.
So the time is very limited. I will ask a very direct question because we could not share all the recommendations, but my questions will be very inclusive. So my question is this: the physical visits of you is difficult. We are aware of this. I mean, from the field, it's hard to get information because of the situation. But I really wonder, what is your agenda? How are you? Are you able to get in touch with the local NGOs and human rights defenders? Because there is a huge needs of the human rights defenders and NGOs to continue their advocacy facilities. For example, there is a need of psychosocial support and also sustainable information process. So I would like to hear about how what is your method? I mean, while physical visits are not possible, how are you getting in touch? How are you getting in touch with the local NGOs and human rights defenders?
We understand. Clear. It's clear. Now, let me also just 1 minute give Erica before I give Mary and Gilmore. So, Erica, please, 1 second. Your questions, you can make it.
Hear me? Can you hear me? Sí, te escuchamos. Thank you. Thank you. I only wanted to ask the Relator if she has foreseen to do her mandate in coordination with the Inter-American System of Human Rights in order to promote the protection of the independent against the reptilians for the defense in human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Now
Okay,
let me invite Gilmore and then Mary Lawlor.
Yeah, well, just briefly to answer Didar's question, it's yes, we have been able to engage with NGOs, with human rights defenders, and at a local level. We've done that, for example, in advance of human rights dialogues that we hold with different countries. And we've been able to, it's been both good and bad. Good in the sense that we've been able, through digital means, to probably communicate with a wider range of NGOs and civil society organizations at local level through digital means. The downside, however, has been, and we've already talked about this, that not everybody has access to digital tools. The connectivity can be poor. We've had many experiences where we're in a conversation and where the conversation breaks down. The other difficulty with it is that it is harder to have the kind of confidential discussion that I think we need sometimes to have, both because there is a concern that some of the digital tools are not entirely secure, there is a reluctance and sometimes a nervousness on the part of some participants to engage with them. So it is not a substitute for direct physical meetings, but it certainly has a lot of potential. And I think when we get out of the pandemic period, I envisage that what we will do is to use a combination of both, to use a combination of digital communication, but also to use physical meetings and confidential meetings where we think that is necessary.
Thank you. Now I have a direct questions from the floor, which has been collected by the Secretariat. I will start with Ms. Lawlor. What advice do you have for states on how they should approach protection of human rights defenders? Do you agree with the newly launched risk approach recommendations? That's to the Mary Lawlor.
Well, my approach is people-centered. I start from that approach. It's about the individual human rights defender. So, as I said, I've been meeting defenders in groups of 3 and 4 since last May, and also to respond to one of the questions about the inter-American system, we've had lots of meetings with the different intergovernmental systems, and in an effort to try and increase protection for human rights defenders. But I see myself as a bridge between the defenders and the governments. And so I get the information from the defenders. I write then communication to the governments. I seek meetings with the permanent mission. This is the way you have to do it in Geneva. So, for example, I have about 3 permanent mission meetings a week. I'm making my way around the world to talk to all the people who oppress and persecute and target human rights defenders. And also I keep a record of the communication so that at the end of 6 months we review each communication that we have sent and see what is the situation with the defender, and if there is nothing happening, then we go to the embassy, to the permanent mission, and ask about them. So that's kind of the way that I am working. And what do I do with states? I mean, I remind them that they all signed up to the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, and that it was by consensus. And it is something that they have agreed to. And when they try and tell me that, you know, so-and-so is a political activist or so-and-so is a terrorist, I tell them I know the difference between a political activist and a terrorist. And if they look at the declaration closely, like yesterday, I was on to a state and they were telling me that some defenders I was talking to them about were A, terrorists, and B, taking money. So I said, you know, they are allowed to take money from foreign sources. That's in the declaration. You agree to that. And when it comes to the ideas, I just say I know the difference between a human rights defender and a terrorist, and don't very politely, of course, don't think that I'm going to be taken in by your description of somebody as a terrorist. So, I mean, all I can do is keep at them and keep explaining and keep trying to persuade. And that is the approach I take with states.
Thank you, Mary. Due to restriction of time, I will be giving you both you and Mr. Gilmore for 2 minutes to react to any question which I present to you. To the European Union Special Representative, Mr. Gilmore, how do you reconcile EU's focus on fighting terrorism and the use and the passage of new anti-terrorism laws in many countries to stifle freedom of expression and democratic spaces within the Union?
Well, let me just, I think, echo what Mary has said. I too know the difference between terrorism and political activity. And the European Union has been very clear in combating terrorism and makes no apology for that. And we've experienced, as you will know, both on the territory of the European Union itself, member states, but also in many countries throughout the world, many horrific terrorist acts, and we will continue to work to combat terrorism. But terrorism is not political activity. What we are seeing in terms of the difficulties that human rights defenders are facing is that normal political activity, normal democratic political activity, the normal mobilization of people and organization of people and assembly of people and expression of opinion, that is being silenced and being suppressed in many countries. And unfortunately, many governments are using the excuse of anti-terrorism activity and anti-terrorism legislation to clamp down on what is normal political activity and mobilization. Secondly, we are now seeing the use of the pandemic as a further excuse that limitations which are introduced for public health reasons are now being hauled out as an excuse to restrict freedom of movement and freedom of assembly. So what we do is we make the reconciling of it, which is the question, is to make the distinction between what is terrorist activity and what is normal political and civic activity to which people have a perfect right.
Thank you. To both of you now, we have two questions to two of you before we go to country-specific questions. The first one is to the UN Special Rapporteur and the EU SR. Are the two mandates coordinating their work? Example, select cases of human rights defenders or themes that they want to both raise to increase impact. The second question I want to pose you is that on behalf of the participants, is that when state forces are perpetrators of violence and therefore cannot do fair investigation, what assistance can you extend to us? That's the question human rights defenders are asking you. And what form of investigation can you extend to make the people who are violating human rights accountable? So those two questions to both of you. One is coordination and one special investigation, whether you can provide to people whose rights have been violated, human rights defenders. I'll start with Gilmore.
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. Well, first of all, we do coordinate, and in fact, we both Mary and I have plans to meet very soon to have a working session on cases and themes and issues that we have to deal in, and we keep in very regular contact. May I say that is the normal practice as far as the European Union is concerned, and my work is concerned, is that I work very closely with the United Nations system, with all of the special rapporteurs and with the High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet, and indeed also with the regional organizations which were already mentioned, like the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and with the Inter-American Commission, and indeed also with ASEAN, with the OSCE, and with the Council of Europe. The second part of the question was, sorry, Hassan, the coordination I've mentioned.
And the other one is
support and assistance. Yes, we do from time to time. Let me just give you one practical example. In Colombia, where there are very high numbers of human rights defenders are killed and are intimidated, one of the practical supports that we have provided to the state is support for the establishment of a special investigations unit and for forensic supports within the prosecutor's office to identify not just the immediate perpetrators of the killings and intimidations and attacks on human rights defenders, but the original authors of those attacks, because sometimes you can identify who has actually pulled the trigger, but who is actually behind it is what you really need to get to the bottom of. So yes, we are providing some supports. I give that as an example of the kind of support that we are providing at a practical level.
Thank you, Gilmore. Mary, you want to add?
Yeah, well, as Eamon said, we plan and we have been in contact, and we plan to reinforce each other's work on human rights defenders in a more, I suppose, structured way. And of course, I'll be pushing Eamon on the EU's position on migrant rights defenders, because that is shocking. And so I can raise cases within the EU, hopefully, that the EU will become a little better at. The other thing I want to say is that when it comes to investigations, like there's one person in Geneva doing communications to governments. There's no capacity for anything like investigations or anything like that. One of the things that I am trying to do is in the context of business and human rights, and particularly because Dublin has a lot of techie companies here. I've been working with Facebook on a policy on human rights defenders and their overall human rights policy, and hopefully they will over time put in a better, because this speaks directly to all attacks on human rights defenders online. They will put in a better method whereby people will have a contact if there is a threat or from either government or society at large posted on their page. So and then in the context of business and human rights in which so many killings occur, I am trying to through the work that I do in Trinity to put more effort into business and human rights and benchmarking companies about their behavior. And I want to follow that up with applied investigations. Now I have to go looking for money. And once I find some money somewhere, I would hope to be able to do a bit more of that investigation stuff on the ground, because impunity, like at the end of the day, it's impunity that is at the heart of all these violations against human rights defenders, and a lack of political will that from states everywhere, regardless of whether they are of what part of the world they are in, which doesn't recognize the legitimate and credible work of human rights defenders.
Thank you so much. Now let me move to country-specific focus questions. Will the EU use special sanctions to military or government officials in the Philippines who are human rights violators? Will there be a special reaction to the event in Ukraine, where in several cases, about 100 cases of attack on human rights defenders, and none of those who ordered the attack have been brought to justice? What special protection, the third question, measures are being contemplated for environmental defenders, as well as effective implementation of the well-known Escazú Agreement? This taken into the account what many post-COVID policies will lead to new socio-environmental conflict, and in the cases of Latin America, violence against those defenders not only persist, but is increasing. Those are the country-specific questions. I will start now with Mary Lawlor, since she has been traversing these places, and then I will give Gilmore. But Gilmore, he will be answering the specific targeting by the Union on these people who are operating human rights violations. Mary.
Well, I have to bring you back to, I respond to what civil society organizations and NGOs send to me through the inbox, through the webmail for the mandate. And I take up cases, as many as I can, and I communicate with governments on them. So that is the way to get me to take up cases. When it comes to blanket things like protests or, where many civilians have been targeted in situations like Ukraine or Belarus, I can only take up human rights defenders. And I have to work out who is a human rights defender in accordance with the declaration. Not all protesters are human rights defenders. So I need to be able to be clear in my own mind that this is somebody who's working for the protection of human rights peacefully, in accordance with the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders and for the rights of others. So that's the kind of working definition that I'm using. And it means that often, you know, somebody might be a protester, but they may not be a human rights defender. But their right to protest should be protected. And that is the job of the Special Rapporteur on freedom of association and assembly. I think that I don't. Is there anything else there that I was supposed to answer? Oh, sorry, I'll just say one thing about environmental human rights defenders. It's really important that the ESCASU agreement is ratified by all those countries. And Eamon, there is a particular role you could play with Colombia and Peru, for example. Yesterday, I spoke to environmental defenders from Peru, and this afternoon I'm going on to a webinar on environmental racism. But it is really important that this agreement is ratified because it gives the right to participation, free informed consent, and it also makes it. Of course, it'll have to be implemented, but it's a really good first step. And Peru and Colombia haven't ratified it yet, so that's something that is a very practical thing that would really help defenders, environmental defenders, in the context of the horrific violations that take place under business and human rights, extractive mining, and also the link with corrupt local officials or oppressive governments.
Thank you. Eamon?
Okay, first of all, on the issue of the use of sanctions, the European Union has used sanctions in the past, but the way in which it has used sanctions in the past has been, first of all, to designate a particular country against whom sanctions will be taken, and then to list people for various activities. So, for example, there are sanctions on people in Russia, there are sanctions on people in Syria, and more recently there have been quite a lot of sanctions in relation to Belarus. What we have done recently is we have developed what we call a global human rights sanctions regime. That was approved by the European Union Council in December. Under that regime, we can apply sanctions in any country in the world for violations of human rights and for violations of international humanitarian law. Currently, our member states are considering where that might be applied and to whom it might be applied. I'm not at liberty to talk about particular countries or particular cases at this point because we have to take considerable care in applying these sanctions because they are subject to legal challenge in the European courts, and we want to make sure that we don't give rise to any excuse that we have acted in some kind of a prejudicial way or talked publicly about possible sanctionees before they take place. But that is currently under consideration, and it's a new tool which the European Union will use. Let me say in relation to the ISCASU agreement that I recently participated in an event in support of the ISCASU event, and we certainly are and will be encouraging countries to ratify that. But it is that is one of a number of measures in the broader business and human rights area that we will be supporting. Our Commissioner Reinders, is currently working on due diligence legislation in the supply chain, and in the new action plan on human rights, which I mentioned earlier, both business and human rights and issues relating to supply chains, and also issues relating to environmental rights and the work on human rights and its interface with environmental activity has a very high priority in that action plan. So you can take it that is something that we will be continuing to work on.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Eamon. Time is actually running out of, so we might be going to certain conclusions. And so now let me let me ask finally. Let me ask final question from this side before I have an instruction. Does European Union mission, and this is for Gilmore, work with the government of transitional period in Sudan to achieve justice for crimes committed, such as the crimes dispersal of the General Command sit in June 2019, and even previous crimes in Darfur? Do you work with them, the international government, to assist them to work with it, like International Criminal Court and other interested parties who want to go there and do their work?
Yes, we do, and our delegation there is working on that, and we very much support the International Criminal Court and the work that the ICC have been doing in trying to ensure that there is accountability for what happened in Sudan. We have given and continue to give very strong support to the ICC in its work.
Thank you so much. Now let me connect the rapporteurs who also have their questions. Unfortunately, I cannot make them, all of them, to be present here in the platform with this team. I can allow 2 of them, and then one I have to remove, and then allow another one. So now let me invite now who I should invite, who are now Erica, to have her questions, interact with the mechanisms, and then I will invite Didar, and then I will invite Janetta, or vice versa. I can invite Janetta, whoever wants to raise a question. We are not, Secretariat told me we are not in a hurry, so we can have some more conversations on this. Erica.
Thank you. I wanted to reiterate my question to the rapporteur if she has foreseen, in coordination with all the inter-American system of human rights, in order to promote the protection of the independent judges before the retaliations against their role in the defense of human rights. And with respect to this retaliation and surveillance, theft, and so forth.
Very well taken, Erica. Mary have noted. Yes, I will now, because we want to make 3 questions to the Mary and also with the Gilmore. So let me now invite Janet to have the floor, and also raise if she wants a question.
With the Spanish translation.
I'll just respond. I think you need to send me a specific request to the webmail, because as I said, I can only respond to specific requests. As I said, I mean, you know, insofar as I'm able, and it's not enough and it's not good enough. I try to work with the Inter-American Commission, but you know, it's patchy. There's no doubt about it. It is patchy. But if you send me a specific request to the email regarding the independence, it will have to be case driven, because I can't do thematic stuff. You would need to go to the Special Rapporteur on independence of judges and lawyers for that. But if you send me specific case material to the inbox, then I can look at that. I should also say that I'm beginning next week to start hearings, what I'm calling hearings, which is where we're having 3 hours a day weeks listening to human rights defenders in specific countries. So it's Brazil next week, and in a couple of weeks' time, I hope to do Somalia. And we're trying to go around, you know, bit by bit as much as we can. We will put that on, I suppose, Twitter or somewhere like that, so that defenders who might want to join the hearing can.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Let me now invite Jeanette to have the floor. Jeanette will be joining us later, so here she goes.
Hi, I'm sorry I got disconnected a little bit. So can I ask my question now?
Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. So my question is, what steps are undertaken or maybe going to be undertaken in order to deal with the issue of the enforced disappearances of women human rights defenders and the specific measures that women human rights defenders who operate in the conflict context need?
Well taken also, that been noted. So Eamon or Mary, you want to react to that?
Enforced disappearance about women human rights defenders, wherever it occurs. Well, again, I take up cases, you know, send me the cases. And I certainly take up the gravest of cases. There's 737 cases at the moment of human rights defenders in my inbox. There's only one person doing communication. It is impossible to take up everyone, but I certainly take up the gravest of cases, and that would be enforced disappearances, assassination attempts, violent attacks, or killings, or long-term imprisonment. The priorities that I've set for the mandate include long-term imprisonment of human rights defenders, killings of human rights defenders, the most remote and marginalized human rights defenders, trying to reach them, and particularly women human rights defenders, LGBTI defenders, and defenders with disabilities who are working for the rights of the disabled. And I'm also trying to look a bit at children who are human rights defenders, particularly in the context of climate justice and education. I've seen some children wanting to be educated in their own language. But it is case driven, you know. And I can't take up whole teams, but I can act on cases.
Well, can I maybe just perhaps offer some encouragement to all of the people who are gathered, and indeed to Jeanette who asked the question. The European Union has delegations as official offices, official representation in about 140 different countries throughout the world. In addition to that, our member states, 27 member states of the European Union, have embassies in countries all over the world. In most of those delegations and in most of those embassies, there are officials who are specifically tasked to deal with human rights issues, and in many cases to deal specifically with gender issues. And I would encourage, where there are cases of enforced disappearances of human rights defenders, of women human rights defenders, of LGBTI human rights defenders, to bring those cases to the attention of the delegations concerned. If there are particularly, if there's a pattern, if there are broader issues that have to be that need to be discussed, bring those as well. And now is a good time to do that, because as I mentioned earlier, we have this new action plan on human rights and democracy, which will be elevating what we are doing on human rights throughout the world. And at a practical level, what that means is that in each individual country, our human rights, the European Union's human rights, or the European Union's delegations and the European Union's member states' embassies will be working together to draw up what we call country strategies. And we want to see those country strategies being informed by the reality of what is happening on the ground. So please, my message to you is to is to let us know what is the reality. That's very important to us at the moment because of all of the difficulties that we've had about communication and being able to travel and so on. It's really important that civil society organizations in the various countries and organizations representing human rights defenders bring to the attention of the European Union delegations and of the embassies of our member states what your needs are so that we can coordinate those and respond to them at a central level in Brussels.
Thank you. We'll ask also another question. Elections, both Mary and also Gilmore, more on Eamon. Elections, which is a very essential part of democratic processes and norms, becoming hugely challenged in this part of the world, in Africa. You might find before the election, the entire space collapsing, with regard to freedom of assembly, association, and expression, a right to protest when you summarize them. And then during a huge amount of violence is being deployed by states to intimidate and to harass political actors and other civil society, including the journalists. And then after evidence of widespread corruption within the election is being suppressed, and people who are actually part of that in the chain of collecting the evidence are being hushed. Internet cut down, the societies, everyone suffers. But so now, what matters, or what advice you could maybe give, assistance to the communities who are being got caught just doing their job during those period of elections?
Well, what the European Union does in normal times is it does election monitoring. We send election observation missions, usually headed by a member of the European Parliament, to oversee, to monitor the elections that are taking place in many countries. In cases where we're not able to send election monitoring missions, we send what we call expert missions. These would be smaller numbers of people who will look at things like the conduct of the election itself, not just what happens on election day, but what happens in the period leading up to the election. The campaign, is it free? Is it fair? Can people, what happens with candidates? What about the electoral roll? How good is that? What are the opportunities for people for voting? And then, of course, in the aftermath of the election, the counting of votes, and sometimes the aftermath of elections itself, where defeated candidates are arrested or put under house arrest, or all of the things. And I know you're familiar with some of that. And of course, our delegations follow these elections very closely. It is something that we give. I think we've done election monitoring in about, I think it's 97 elections in different parts of the world over the course of the last 5 years.
Thank you. So is there some more questions I can pick up from here in Philippines, particularly human rights defenders who are working in Philippines now? They really calling for special solidarity because of the harsh conditions now and the high-handedness of the authorities there. Do you have a special hearing like now the one you are going to conduct for Somalis and others, Mary? You want to meet them?
I actually have had lots of conversations with Philippine human rights defenders. We've had several meetings because of the fact that they are so severely targeted and red tagged as communists, and the threats online by government officials and all of that. So I've actually put a lot of time into the Philippines so far. I've also met with the group of Philippine parliamentarians that are trying to get this bill to protect human rights defenders through the parliament. So I won't be having a hearing on the Philippines in the coming in the coming months anyway, because I've already to put so much time and effort into the Philippines, and it needs it. It's just that there's over 180 countries at the UN, and everyone wants to obviously everyone has issues with their country and they want to tell, you know, have a meeting about it. So it's difficult to get around everybody.
Could I just say also on the Philippines,
Sure.
that just over a week ago, the European Union had a special meeting with the Philippines at governmental level, where we talked about human rights issues, good governance, rule of law, and where specifically the situation of human rights defenders was discussed, including quite a number of individual cases or individual examples of cases which were discussed. The issue of red tagging, which Mary has referred to, and I personally attended at that meeting and gave a contribution to it, where I highlighted my concern and the concern of the European Union about many of those issues. And of course, we had consultations with civil society organizations in advance of that meeting.
Thank you. I will also want to raise another question from Cameroon. English-speaking Cameroon. As you may appreciate, the huge amount of violence that is taking place there, perpetuated by both state and non-state actors, and now is getting to what we call it localized violence. Even some unknown people are coming to various non-state actors who are negative forces coming together and terrorizing the population. Even they cannot go to now to farm, and now is a farming session. So a human rights defender who is participating here, Najuru, what efforts is the European Union making to ensure that those who are responsible for the systematic violation of human rights in English-speaking region of Cameroon are sanctioned? I know that you don't want to go to a specific country mentioned in terms of the new regime, which you have already expounded, which was passed by the Union, but the impunity is really central to all the violence which is happening in this part of the world. Is there a way this regime in general, I'm not going to specific questions on countries and individuals, will you hope that it will address that?
Yes, indeed. And, you know, it is precisely to address these type of situations that the global human rights sanctions regime was introduced. You're absolutely right that impunity is widespread, and the belief that no matter what is done in a country, that the perpetrators can get away with it. It's also one of the reasons. I might mention that, of course, the sanctions regime that we have introduced, the global human rights sanctions regime, will apply to non-state actors as well as to state actors. It will apply to both. It's also why we have, as I mentioned earlier, given very strong support to the International Criminal Court, which of course is a court of last resort. Why we encourage countries and press countries to investigate these crimes that have occurred, to provide protection for people. Cameroon is a country that you can take it. We will be giving increasing attention to in the period ahead.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we passed our time, but still we have okay. Let me take another Didar Erdam to give her. She raised her hand. Okay, yeah. Where is Didar now? Yes, Didar. Now you have the floor.
My question is, how do you reconcile the use and the passage of new anti-terrorism laws in many countries to stifle freedom of expression and democratic spaces? Thank you.
Eamon, I think we asked you that question again, but
well, anti-terrorism laws should be laws that are, you know, directed at addressing terrorism, not directed at addressing or trying to stamp down on political activity and civil and political rights. And I think we have to make that distinction very clear. Unfortunately, there is a tendency in some countries to use it's terrorism one day, it's the pandemic the next day, it's something else later to restrict fundamental freedoms. And we have to be very clear in that distinction, that laws that are intended to, whether it's to address terrorism or whether it's to address public health, should not be used to restrict civil and political freedoms.
Thank you so much for again coming back to that. Unless you might want to have a 1 minute, some sort of a closing remark from your side, I'm going to wrap up the meeting and actually officially close. So if there's any one of you who want to have a 1 minute, a closing remark, the floor is yours, Mary, if you want to make it.
Well, just to say, I'm very glad to have been invited to participate today. You know, my background is with human rights defenders. I've worked very closely with human rights defenders over the last 20 years, and I am delighted to have this position as UN Special Rapporteur, because I think in my added value will be able to be trying to push governments a bit further in a way that when you're a civil society person like I was, you don't have the same kind of access. So that's what I see my added value as, and I plan to work on the priorities I've set. Please do take a look at the killings report on the UN Special Rapporteur website. And also, please, I put up a consultation document for civil society on the theme of the next report to the General Assembly, which will be long-term imprisonment of human rights defenders. And as we know, this touches very closely to the whole issue of subversion and anti-state activities and the whole security terrorism agenda. So I would be happy if some of you could make some submissions. And just to say, I'll do what I can, you know, I really will. Thank you.
Thank you. Eamon?
Well, just to thank all of the participants who have raised questions, and to thank in particular the rapporteurs for the reports that they made, and to say that we will, of course, look at those reports very closely and consider how we respond to it. I think my parting shot is this, that I know how difficult it is for human rights defenders to work on the ground, and particularly in the present environment. And I want you to have a sense that you're not alone, and that the European Union will try to do whatever we can to support you and to help you. We can't work miracles, of course, but we will do everything we possibly can. So please stay in touch with our delegations. Please stay in touch with the embassies of our member states. If there is anything that you didn't get an opportunity to ask me today, or if there is anything that you're not happy with the answer I gave you, please write to me, and please let me know, and we'll respond to it. Our door is open to human rights defenders. Defending and promoting the rights of human rights defenders and their safety is a very high priority for the European Union, for High Commissioner Borrell, for Commissioner Urpilainen, for all of us. And please let us know how we can help and when we can help.
Thank you so much. Defenders, they are not alone. There are so many friends, including now across the Atlantic. There's a new administration now who are going to reset the record of the United States assistance to human rights community and democracy activists. And I think we are better off when both European friends and American friends work together for the space assistance, human rights defense, and collectively voice a common concern when democracy and human rights is under attack. Now I want to give a 1 minute departing shot to each of the rapporteurs. Let me start with Erica. Erica, with your last comment before we wrap up. Okay. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I only wanted to conclude in a nutshell. I'd like to say that defenders of human rights, male and female defenders of human rights, are facing many attacks, risks, harassment, digitally and presentially. And what we have to do is an awareness and the knowledge of tools for all, so that human rights defenders can work in safe spaces, in digital safe spaces. It's also important to have proper financing. We need financing sources. We need to have funds available in order to work and strengthen these digital safe spaces before what states can do against them. And also, we wanted to ask you to please develop comprehensive education plans for human rights defenders on the long run. And then we could also have a focus of inclusion of human rights standards in large companies related to this digital environment, and also within the states. It would be very important to promote that digital security is considered in a comprehensive focus of security, because when we're talking about the security and safety of human rights defenders, we're thinking more in physical safety and not the digital security. We're not taking into account the digital risks that these human rights defenders are facing. Therefore, we also ask you to keep present that we could interact with the state, with the companies, and through the rapporteurs in the European Union, that we could consolidate this protection framework. I also want to thank very much the space you've given us to be able to to show you and mention all the different circumstances that we're living. We as human rights defenders, men and women, and expect that the recommendations we gave you could be implemented and that we are able to work in safer and more secure environments. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Erica. Now let me invite Dieter.
Thank you very much to all the participants and the rapporteurs. I think it was very useful, the discussions, and we also understand that the communication and being in touch with the groups on the field from to the local NGOs and the representatives of the populations is very important, and we wish that we will be in touch for this goal. Thank you very much for organizing this event.
Thank you, Dieter. Best of wish. Now let me invite finally Janetta. Janetta, yeah, she's online still. Yeah.
I am with you. Thank you very much for this roundtable, and I hope this discussion and our roundtable will result in future further actions to improve the safety and security of women human rights defenders, and if not improve, at least to let it not worsen, because in many contexts their situation is becoming worse. And I do hope that I would like to reiterate the importance of identifying and addressing the specific needs of women human rights defenders, because they are very specific. I know that all human rights defenders are facing risks and challenges, but I would like to just underline that women are facing very specific needs and challenges. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, as a time, coming to close, we are opening up. As a number of you have said that this conversation is only beginning. I know both Gilmore and Mary Lawlor. They are friends, they are human rights defenders themselves, and willing to listen anywhere. I always watch when Mary used to work with the frontline defenders in various corners, either at the platform or in Geneva, having a tea, but her ear all the time closer to the human rights defender too. Don't miss any word the human rights defender is saying from various parts of the world. And she will continue with, despite the limited resources, let us all advocate, particularly European Union, to increase the funding for the Special Rapporteur to hire more staff, people at her secretariat in Dublin, so that, you know, she can get more feasibility, more, staff to document, to listen to various human rights defenders. I truly, really cherish it to be this on behalf of the secretariat of the defenders, which member ProtectDefenders.eu. I would like to thank you, each and every one of you, particularly Eamon, Mary, Erika, Janet, Didar, Hugo, and the Secretariat, and also more importantly, to the interpreters who have made sure that we all listen through, I think, various 6 languages, and everyone was comfortably hearing what other person was saying. So I really want to say thank you so much for facilitating on that. Organizing this type of meeting, a global meeting, is not easy, as we all know that we had various meetings, testings, and all that, but it has went very successful. I thank the Secretariat, the Technical Committee, the people who provided and assisted this platform, but more importantly, the conversations. So I'm sure that there is follow-up. All these conversations will be captured, and hopefully there will be some sort of highlights, the same way we could breakaway groups, their highlights. Unless Hugo and others want to say a word, I want to say that thank you, all of you, for coming and for joining, and also the human rights defenders who joined this conversation from all over the world. I can read you. You are all debating comment. You are so happy to be here. We will also happy to serve you and to work for you. For those who are based in Africa, Defenders is part of the ProtectDefenders.eu. You can always reach to us by going to our hotlines and by calling us or presenting yourself to our offices in various parts of the continent. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you.